Take a look at this juicy little tomato. Now imagine a world where Italian cuisine didn't even know of its existence. A world without marinara sauce or margherita pizza or lasagna. It might seem unthinkable, but there was a time in human history and not too long ago when this was a reality. A time when Italians knew nothing about tomatoes and when prego was merely politeness and not synonymous with that delicious pasta sauce full of sugar. So on today's episode, we'll be answering a few questions. Where did the tomato come from? Why were Europeans so afraid of it? Is it a vegetable or is it a fruit? And yes, what did Italians eat before tomatoes? Italy is known for their food and for their beautiful language, scenic views, the Colosseum, great football and fashion sense, interesting history, and White Lotus Season 2, one of my favorite shows. But food is so closely tied with their culture that you may be thinking that Italians have been eating the same kind of food since Rome was founded in 753 BC. That the day Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March 44 BC, his last meal was spaghetti bolognese. Or when Rome successfully invaded Britain in 43 AD, Emperor Claudius celebrated with a nice pepperoni pizza and a can of Pepsi. But the use of tomatoes on the Italian peninsula represents just a small fraction of this history. And I say Italian peninsula because the concept of Italy is relatively recent, after the different states on the peninsula unified into Italia in 1871. So why didn't Italians use tomatoes in their cuisine? Well, that's because tomatoes didn't even exist in the Old World, meaning in Europe, Asia, and Africa. That is, until European settlers arrived in the Americas and specifically in Mesoamerica. This is a region that includes parts of present-day Mexico and expands into Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and the northern regions of Costa Rica. It was there that Spanish settlers, with their lispy accents, came across the Aztecs with open arms, love, friendship, and only good intentions. The Aztecs were known to eat tomatoes as far back as 700 AD, which they referred to as tomatel in their native language. Tomatel literally meant the swelling fruit, which the Spanish called tomate, and hence today in English we call tomato. The Aztecs often used tomatoes in their cooking, making stews, sauces, and soups. Then in the early 16th century, the Spanish, when some of them returned back home, brought with them tomato seeds and introduced tomatoes to southern Europe. This was part of what was known as the Columbian Exchange, which was the period after Columbus when plants, animals, and diseases were swapped between the Old World and the New World. Because the tomato wasn't the only food that was brought over to Europe and vice versa. For example, can you imagine Irish or Polish cuisine without potatoes? Well, that originated in the Americas as well, and so did corn and avocados, chilies, chocolate, vanilla, blueberries, and turkey, hence Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, the Old World exclusively had wheat, rice, apples, oranges, bananas, chickens, cows, and pigs, among other food. A lot of the ingredients that we think of staple to a certain country or region today was a result of that exchange. And speaking of exchange, if you like this video so far, or after you reach the end, please give it a like and subscribe, and in return, I'll make more content like this. Now, as I alluded to in the beginning of my video, when the tomato first arrived in Europe, it was more feared rather than loved. In fact, in the late 18th century, it received the nickname the poison apple, a deadly reputation born out of a game of chemistry and class. The rich aristocrats at that time ate tomatoes out of plates that were made out of lead. Tomatoes are high in acidity, and so lead leached out from the plates onto the tomatoes, and many people ended up dying. As a result, the tomato received a deadly reputation that was spread throughout Europa. This is why at that time, some people grew tomatoes strictly as decorative plants like beautiful red flowers in a garden instead of for eating. But wait, were tomatoes back then actually red? Enter Pietro Andrea Mattioli, an Italian doctor and botanist from Siena who, in 1544, gave the first description of the tomato in Europe, calling it the pomodoro. This is the Italian word for tomato, which directly translates into golden apple. It's named as such because it's believed that the first tomatoes that originally made their way to Europe were yellow instead of red, although tomatoes did come and still do in a variety of different colors. It's just that over time, the red variety won out in popularity, perhaps due to size, taste, or maybe even color. Because imagine if pasta was yellow instead of red. It just kind of looks weird, I don't know. But our friend Pietro didn't simply stop at naming the tomato the golden apple. He also classified it as a mandrake, which is a type of plant historically known for its aphrodisiac properties, which is why the French at the time called tomatoes love apples. So fellas, if you want to set the mood, put those candles away and place a couple tomatoes on that table. They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
So what is a tomato? The question everyone has been asking. Is it a vegetable or is it a fruit? Well, botanically speaking, It's a fruit. A vegetable is technically a root, stem, or leaf of a plant, while fruits are the ovaries of a flowering plant. For example, you like to eat rhubarb pie, which you think is a delicious fruity dessert? Wrong. It's a vegetable. You think corn on the cob that you slather with butter is a vegetable? Wrong. You're eating a fruit. You like to eat blueberries so much they called you Blueberry Brittany back in high school and you think they're fruits? Okay, you were right on that one. But that is the botanical classification. You also have the culinary classification, which is different from the scientific one. In the culinary context, fruits are typically sweet or tart and used in desserts, while vegetables are more savory and used in main dishes. So in this sense, a tomato is a vegetable, not a fruit. I guess like all things in life, it's just a matter of perspective. Fast forwarding the story a little bit, over time the fear of tomatoes started to subdue, and it was in 1889 when the popularity of tomatoes really started to take off. This was the year that the modern pizza was invented in the city of Naples in the sun-kissed region of Campania. The Neapolitans were preparing for a visit from the Queen of Italy, Queen Margherita, and they wanted to create for her something very special. Remember, 1889 was just 17 years after Italy finished unifying into a single state. So they presented the Queen with a pizza that resembled the Italian flag. Green basil, white mozzarella, and red tomatoes. Beautiful. This was the birth of the Neapolitan, or Margherita pizza, which we all love today. Unless you're gluten or dairy free, sorry about that. Which now leads me to the final piece of the story. What did Italians eat until tomatoes made their way to the peninsula? First, it's important to remember that before unification, Italians had very strong regional differences, and it's argued that they still do. So what they ate depended on the city or region where they were from. So let's take a look. First, Italians consumed a lot of grain-based foods. Bread, for example, has always been a staple in Italian cuisine with many different regional styles and recipes. Pasta also predates the introduction of tomatoes by hundreds of years, though the sauces were different. Often they were olive oil based with herbs, garlic, cheese, and other local ingredients. For example, there's cacio e pepe, a Roman dish that had just 3 ingredients: cheese, pepper, and pasta. Or pasta con le sarde, which is a traditional Sicilian dish made with sardines, fennel, pine nuts, and raisins. They also ate legumes and vegetables. Beans, lentils, chickpeas, and peas were common protein sources, often served in soups. Other vegetables like onions, garlic, and leafy greens were also prominent in Italian diet. Meat and fish. The coastal regions relied heavily on fish and other seafood. Inland meats such as pork and lamb were common, though they were reserved for wealthier classes or special occasions. Cheese and olive oil. These were and still are fundamental ingredients in Italian cuisine. Olives are native to the Mediterranean region, and olive oil was used for cooking and as a condiment, while cheese was eaten on its own or incorporated into a variety of dishes. And Italian food used a lot of herbs and spices. They made use of locally available herbs like basil, oregano, and rosemary, and spices brought from the east through trade routes. So as you could see, Italian food was quite diverse, and the tomato, although now taking center stage in a variety of dishes, was an addition to an already vibrant culinary tradition. With that said, I hope you enjoyed today's show and learned something new. If you like this episode, I think you would also like my David Goes Deep episode on astrology, which covers the history, personality traits, psychology, and also something called precession. Thanks so much for watching, and please give this episode a like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. Last, let me know in the comments below, what's your favorite pasta dish? I'm about to go make some myself. Peace.